Tonight, 2 American states are pushing back. Tonight, Minnesota and Illinois say enough is enough. They are suing the Trump administration, accusing it of turning immigration enforcement into a campaign of fear. This is not just about immigration. This is about constitutional rights, state authority, and public safety. What this story is about, on Monday, Minnesota and Illinois filed separate lawsuits against the Trump administration, challenging a major escalation in federal immigration enforcement. Both states argue that the federal government has sent a surge of immigration and customs enforcement agents, ICE, into Democratic-led states, creating fear in communities, using excessive force, and violating constitutional protections. According to state officials, this is not routine law enforcement. They say this is an aggressive federal crackdown that is undermining trust, destabilizing neighborhoods, and putting innocent people at risk. Why these lawsuits were filed? The lawsuits focus on a dramatic increase in federal immigration operations in major cities, including Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Chicago. State leaders say ICE agents are conducting arrests without proper warrants, using military-style tactics in civilian neighborhoods, wearing unclear or obscured identification, detaining people in ways that local officials say violate constitutional rights. Minnesota and Illinois argue that these actions are spreading terror, not safety. They say families are afraid to leave their homes, workers are afraid to go to their jobs, parents are afraid to send their children to school. Minnesota's case, federal overreach. Minnesota's lawsuit describes the federal operation as an unconstitutional invasion of state authority. State officials argue that ICE agents are operating with little coordination with local law enforcement. Federal agents are outnumbering local police in some areas. Communities are being flooded with armed personnel. Minnesota, as Attorney General, says the federal government is abusing its power and violating the 5th and 10th Amendments, which protect due process and limit federal intrusion into state governance. The state claims these actions are politically motivated and disproportionately aimed at Democratic-led states. Illinois and Chicago joined the fight. Illinois and the city of Chicago filed their own lawsuit, making similar accusations. They argue that federal agents are using excessive force, conducting aggressive raids in residential neighborhoods, ignoring long-standing local policies that limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. Illinois officials say these actions undermine public safety by destroying trust between immigrant communities and local police. They argue that when people are afraid of ICE, they stop reporting crimes, making everyone less safe. Claims of fear and terror. One of the strongest accusations in both lawsuits is that federal agents are intentionally creating fear. The states say ICE operations have included early morning raids, armed agents surrounding homes, detentions in public places. Officials say these tactics look less like law enforcement and more like intimidation. They argue that this level of force is unnecessary, dangerous, and unconstitutional. What the Trump administration says, the Trump administration strongly denies these claims. Federal officials say, ICE is enforcing existing immigration laws. Agents are targeting individuals who are in the country illegally. Operations are necessary for the national security and public order. The Department of Homeland Security argues that states do not have the authority to block federal immigration enforcement. They insist that the federal government is acting within its legal powers. The bigger constitutional battle. This is about more than immigration. At the center of these lawsuits is a fundamental question. How much power does the federal government have inside individual states? Minnesota and Illinois argue that federal authority is not unlimited. States have the right to protect residents from unconstitutional actions. Civil rights must be respected regardless of immigration status. Legal experts say this case could set major precedents for federal-state relations, immigration enforcement limits, civil rights protections, political undertones. The lawsuits also highlight deep political divisions. Both Minnesota and Illinois are Democratic-led states. State leaders claim the immigration surge is not evenly applied nationwide, but focused on states that oppose Trump's immigration agenda. They argue this is selective enforcement driven by politics, not public safety. The administration denies this, but the accusation adds fuel to an already heated national debate. Why this matters to all Americans This case affects more than immigrants. It raises questions every American should care about. Can federal agents use force without accountability? Can states challenge federal power? Where do constitutional rights begin and end? Supporters of the lawsuit say this is about defending democracy and civil liberties. Critics argue it weakens law enforcement and border control. What happens next? The courts will now decide whether these federal operations can continue. Judges may be asked to halt or limit ICE deployments, set rules for federal enforcement inside states, clarify constitutional boundaries. The outcome could reshape immigration enforcement across the country. Strong closing. This is no longer just an immigration debate. It is a legal showdown between states and Washington, a test of constitutional limits, and a defining moment for federal power in America. The courts will decide, but the impact will be felt nationwide.